Trump puts the justices in the hot seat. The president last night at the State of the Union directly calling out the justices about their recent tariffs decision. So now, are the gloves off? I'm Zach Schonfeld, legal affairs reporter here at The Hill. And each week on the Gavel, we break down how politics are shaping the courts and how courts are shaping politics. And I am joined with my partner in covering crime, Ella Lee, fellow legal affairs reporter here at The Hill. And today we have a lot to talk about tariffs, the big refund fight that is coming, including a hearing that could be coming up pretty soon. But before we get to talking about all of the tariff refunds, Ella, and all of that, we got to start with last night. You and I watched the president's address and the justices sitting just a few feet away from him. It's one of these few times a year where we actually see the justices and the president in the same room. And maybe for Trump, there weren't so much some fireworks, but still, he directly called them out. Walk us through for anyone who decided to maybe make the smart choice and went to bed last night and what didn't stay up through the address. Just start by walking us through what the president said last night in front of the justices.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we can agree that President Trump was pretty much on his best behavior last night, but there is sort of a different level of what that means for the president to maybe other people. And so Trump still sort of got his dig in on the court. There were 4 justices that ended up going. It was Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Elena Kagan, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett. The ones who didn't go are Justices Thomas, Alito, Sotomayor, Gorsuch, and Jackson. And so, I mean, 3 of the 4 justices that went to the State of the Union last night had just ruled against Trump. And so this is a little bit fresh. And so, you know, he got his dig in on the court. He said that their involvement in his tariffs policy was unfortunate. But like I said, I mean, knowing the president, that's still a pretty mild burn for him. The justices, for their part, I mean, they seemed a little reticent. Trump swung by on his way in, but the interaction was very polite, very brief. They shook hands, they made eye contact. And I mean, I think it went about as well as it could have. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think, one of the questions we had coming into last night is when the president does those handshakes in years past, it's been pretty cordial, but we had no idea. Even another question I had was, is he even going to make that left turn down the aisle? There's nothing that says he can't turn right and go to his cabinet, but he followed the norm. He made that left turn, saw the justices, shook their hands. Like usual, you and I were playing lip reader last night, trying to see what the justices said. The one who I really could tell is when he went to Justice Barrett at the end of the line. It certainly appeared that the president told her, thank you, as they were shaking hands. I don't know if you caught any of the other justices' comments, but still, I agree, quite cordial there. And even in the moment where the president started going after tariffs, they were still pretty stone-faced. And it was quite different than the closest example I can think of is back in 2010 when it was President Obama up there speaking, and it was just after the Citizens United campaign finance decision. He did a similar thing and criticized them. The big thing everyone remembers from 2010 is Justice Alito was seen mouthing the words "not true."
Yeah, that
but
was quite a moment.
Last night, it seemed that they were much more stone-faced and maybe learned Alito's lesson a little bit from 2010 and to not make many reactions as Americans were watching.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true, especially once Trump got into tariffs. The court locked in. We saw them putting their hands in their laps. They're looking straight ahead. To me, it seemed like they were pretty much just waiting for it to be over and honestly hoping it wouldn't stray too far from a slap on the wrist. And it seems like that sort of is what it ended up being.
And he did keep it under 2 hours, so that it could have gone longer.
Certainly could have, yeah. And I mean, I think too, the justices, they go almost out of obligation. Roberts and Kagan especially, they're regulars, but we've gotten zero indication from the other justices that the State of the Union is a good time for them. They do not like this event. I just remember Justice Scalia ages ago saying it looked like the justices were just there to sit like bumps on a log, and that really is what it looked like to me. You see their heads sort of just sitting consistently straight across that front row when everyone else behind them is sort of standing and sitting down as part of the theatrics of the night.
Yeah, my favorite comment is when Chief Justice John Roberts calls it a political pep rally. That's my personal favorite. But yeah, everyone's got their little turn of phrase of why they hate the State of the Union. So only the regulars attending last night. But really, as you look to the 4 who were there in the chamber last night, Ella, it seems like those really are your 4 institutionalists on the court. When I saw those 4 and no more, I got to say, it didn't really come as too much of a surprise to me. As you think about Chief Justice John Roberts, someone who has attended the State of the Union each and every year since he's been Chief Justice, including that year that even COVID really restricted attendance. He was one of the few people still allowed in there. Justice Kagan, she's been there every year. She, of course, before on the Supreme Court was actually serving in the federal government in the Justice Department as Solicitor General. But also now Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett have been there quite often too. They both have been there every year with the exception of the COVID year. And then Justice Barrett missed 2024, not sure quite why. But other than that, she's been there every year. So my basic takeaway of just the who was there and who's not is the regulars were there, the institutionalists were there, but the others not so much. So really an interesting dynamic there because, of course, another person who we didn't see, we've been talking about the justices who were there, but a big absence last night was Justice Neil Gorsuch, one of Donald Trump's own appointees who voted against him on that tariffs. And yet we didn't get to see that moment last night of Trump. We saw it with him and Barrett, but nothing with him and Gorsuch. So we'll have to maybe wait for next year for that to happen, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Gorsuch is one of those ones who's sort of hit or miss as to whether he'll be there, but you can't really blame him for not showing up last night.
Yeah, and beyond just also the attendance, I was also struck by when we got into the speech and into that tariffs portion. You and I had the prepared remarks from the White House that was on the teleprompter for the president to say, but there was a moment when he got to that tariffs where if you compare what he actually said in the chamber to what was written on the teleprompter in those prepared remarks, he added some things, and I want to talk about it a little bit. I think we got a graphic to show what he added, but I'm just going to read from it here just a little bit. So he gets into that tariff point, and you can see it there. The highlighted text there on the screen are the words that Trump added last night off the cuff at the State of the Union. And then the non-highlighted words, which you're seeing right now, is what was actually the prepared text on the teleprompter. So when he got into it, the line said, we had negotiated before the Supreme Court's involvement, but it was the president himself who right there in that moment included the word unfortunate. Went on, the disappointing ruling, that was in the teleprompter. But then you see it there as you get to the second half of the quotes. He just started going on and on about tariffs, including some of these phrases, and there's more than just even in the graphic right now, of adding to what was the script about tariffs, talking about how he thinks the various wars and foreign conflicts that he's been negotiating with other countries. He says tariffs have played a role in that. And you just see right there on the screen, this was not in the script. So yes, the broadside against the Supreme Court was pre-planned. It was in the script. But make no mistake, Trump added a little bit of his own flair. But I still agree with what you said, Ella, at the beginning, that this is still, for Trump, it's just not too much fireworks. He could, compared to even just Friday when he was saying some of the justices should be an embarrassment to their families, it's quite different.
Yeah, well, and then, I mean, President Trump, he likes to riff. I mean, this is somebody, we see him get up, on a podium and he can wind on and on and on for as much as he wants about anything he wants to talk about. And that's, I think to the point, like it's a risk for the justices to go either way. You never know what the president's going to say, but I agree that he stayed pretty tame.
The weave, I believe, is the term that the president uses to describe this phenomenon. Another interesting aspect every year at the State of the Union, whether the Supreme Court is in the limelight or not, is this idea you alluded to just a few moments ago, is that they don't stand up for most things, even things that you or I might think are super uncontroversial. So I don't know, where do you think the line was last night? To me, I saw them standing when Team USA came in. So I guess that is uncontroversial enough. But there was a moment where they were recognizing one of the veterans who they recognized last night with one of the awards that was given out. And the justices didn't stand for that. So I guess the line of controversy is somewhere between veterans and the Olympics. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that they are erring on the side of caution at pretty much every opportunity that's presented to them. I mean, one moment that really highlighted that to me was sort of when the two National Guard members attacked in DC were honored with a Purple Heart. One of them, Andrew Wolf, was there to receive the military decoration, and the family of Sarah Beckstrom, the other one who was tragically killed by the gunman, they received hers for her. So Trump, he's describing the attack. Wolf and Beckstrom's families, they sort of stand to be honored. The crowd is cheering, both bipartisan cheers, something we didn't see too much of last night. But if you look closely at the video, I mean, all four of the justices are seated, they're staring forward, they're not clapping. And I mean, you might think like, man, that's cold. And of course, I'm not in the justices' heads, but you have to think that the fact that the Guard member's alleged attacker is actively facing charges sort of plays a role here. I mean, there's no way for the justices to know whether his case might eventually reach their court. And so I really do think it is sort of a moment here of better safe than sorry.
All right, I'll give it them on that one that the National Guard case is still active. I'll give you that. That okay, maybe that one could get to that, but I don't know. Some of these other veterans, I just don't really see the issue that could one day come before. But that's just me, at least. I think the justices should be a little less, maybe a little less cautious, and don't have to worry too much. It's just applause. All right, one thing that I got to ask you about before we move off from State of the Union, because you caught this with your eagle eyes right there at the end of the speech. Is I was watching for as the president, when he got down from the lectern to go do those handshakes on his way out, I was waiting to see him shaking the justices' hands again like he usually does. And there was actually a moment where for a split second I thought he was snubbing them, but then I realized they were already gone out of their seats. But you spotted them. You saw the exit route.
Yeah, look, I was on the C-SPAN feed, and shout out C-SPAN's cameramen. They are doing God's work as always. But you can see the moment that the justices sort of decide to just dip out. It's after Trump shakes hands with Vice President J.D. Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson. Trump sort of turns around to the crowd. He gives a tight smile to somebody. And then just like one by one, the camera catches the tops of each of their heads streaming out in single file. They did not wait for Trump to get a chance to swing past them again, potentially prompt a confrontation. This was an immediate sort of decision to like, peace out, we are out of here, and they were gone.
They were gone indeed. Another State of the Union in the books. All right, Ella, let's move on to talking more about tariffs, because it's only been about 5 days or so since the blockbuster 6-3 ruling striking down the president's global tariffs, but already major developments, the president moving full steam ahead on Plan B. He announced it right there on Friday, just hours after the ruling. Walk us through, the tariffs that we're at right now and the new tariffs and the new plan that the president has to still carry out his global trade war.
Yeah, so after Trump's emergency tariffs were struck down, he announced this new 10% tariff on imported goods, and that's all goods not covered by exemptions. So that went into effect yesterday, and Trump's authorities, Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, which lets him impose tariffs up to 15% for up to 150 days over unbalanced trade. Now, kind of weirdly enough, Trump has actually said that he wants that tariff to be 15%, but the proclamation that he signed was for 10%. And so that is what he's working with for now, to be seen if he ends up bumping that up to 15 at some point. But right now it's 10.
And also to be seen lawsuits, no lawsuits yet. You and I keep checking the dockets, keep hitting refresh, nothing yet. And one of the reasons I'm wondering for that is because of the fact that he's only signed in fine print that proclamation on 10%. Maybe we're still waiting for that 15%, and that's when the lawsuits will land. But meanwhile, we don't have to wait for that because there's plenty of lawsuits already on refunds, and the refund fight is moving full steam ahead. Actually, just before you and I sat down, we got a notice from one of the companies who's been suing, saying they actually want a hearing as soon as tomorrow. So it seems that we really could be moving full steam ahead, but there's really a lot of questions at this point as to how this refund process is going to work. And so
yeah, the Supreme Court gave no guidance here, no roadmap, no nothing.
No roadmap at all. And I don't have a perfect roadmap either, but I thought I'd just start by just sharing a little bit about what we do know so far and the clues that we've pieced together just following these cases, even before they reach the Supreme Court. This question of refunds has really been in the background here all the way since last spring. So from all the court filings in these many cases, we do have some clues. So the basic sense is, as you just said, the Supreme Court gave no roadmap. This is leaving it to the U.S. Court of International Trade, this specialized trade court in New York City that got the tariff case when it was filed originally last spring. That's where you can expect the action to happen. And the next thing that could happen here is right now that trade court actually has an order on the books that says anyone who's filing these new emergency tariff lawsuits, they automatically get paused because the case was at the Supreme Court. And as of right now, that pause has yet to be lifted. So that seems to be the logical next step here, is that pause needs to be lifted so these cases can start moving forward. And then once they do, we've heard from the Justice Department that the basic takeaway is they want to streamline things as much as possible. They want to create possibly a steering committee of these businesses to represent the hundreds of companies. And then the other thing, to keep in mind here that I think has been sometimes getting lost in some of the public discussion is that in court all along, Ella, the Trump administration has been insisting that they will not object if the courts issue refunds. There's been a lot of talk out there of, okay, is the Trump administration actually going to issue refunds? But they have already locked in their position in court over and over again, saying we're not going to object to the courts doing so. So there's a question of what is the court process going to look like? But if the court orders a refund, the Trump administration has said they won't stand in the way. But meanwhile, as we wait for these next steps to happen, Ella, I thought it'd be fun if I could just go through all of the companies that, or not all of them, there's hundreds of companies that have sued over tariffs. But I thought
Hopefully not
I
all
picked,
of them.
yeah, I hope not all of them, but I'm going to go through a lot because I picked out the big brands that I thought people might know. And my goal is maybe I can list off at least one brand that all of our viewers can relate to. So you can play my game here and tell me at the end here if you have any of these products. All right, we'll start with apparel. Companies that have sued include Columbia Sportswear, J. Crew, Steve Madden, Crocs. In the automotive, anyone who's got a Toyota car out there, Toyota is suing. Goodyear Tires, a lot of tech companies, including Logitech, GoPro, Xerox, Peloton, the bikes. Also, I don't know, Ella, do you have one of those pop socket things on the back of your phone? I
I
don't.
used to, but my sister has one of those. So yeah, tariffs for
You didn't
her.
quite do show and tell. I was going to ask you to do show and tell for
Exactly.
us,
No,
but
I
pop
don't.
sockets suing also. And then in addition, you got Costco, if there's any Costco fans out there, as well as Dole Bananas also suing. Finally, just a few companies to wrap us up in the retail section: Barnes & Noble, Bath & Body Works, and Revlon also suing. And if you think you have won my game because I have not listed a company that speaks to you, I do have one catch-all, and that is FedEx this week has sued. So I think pretty much everyone out there has had either shipped or received a FedEx package at some point. So you probably have everyone out there has some touch point to the tariff refunds. But important to point out, any of these refunds are just going to go to the businesses. It would be up to the businesses, of course, to decide whether consumers are actually, what they're going to do with that, if they're going to profit that or lower prices or anything like that.
Or if President Trump ends up giving those tariff checks to Americans, but TBD on that as well.
Or JB Pritzker, he sent an invoice to the president saying you got to give people refunds. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but yeah, we'll see. But meanwhile, I can tell you about all these big brands. That's actually not the docket I'm watching on refunds. The docket I've been watching. It's actually this little auto parts store out in Michigan. It's called AGS Automotive. And the reason I'm watching this is, as far as we can tell, this seems to be the lead docket for tariff refunds. It is this auto parts store that all the other cases have been starting to be consolidated under. And I was alluding to an update just a moment ago. That is this AGS Auto Parts store. They have asked the trade court to schedule a hearing to talk about next step in refunds as soon as tomorrow. So could be coming very soon. But what do you think, Ella? Could we be getting some action in refunds here pretty soon?
Yeah, look, I mean, I was on a press call after the court's decision, and Victor Owen Schwartz, who's, the man behind VOS Selections, which I just put those two and two together recently, embarrassingly enough. It's the wine importer that led the tariffs case. What he and his attorneys said on this press call is that this is all about refunds now. They want their money back. And Schwartz said the Trump administration, he forced small businesses to gamble with their livelihood, trying to predict the unpredictable, and they want those improperly collected taxes back. And so we saw that effort sort of formally start on Tuesday when VOS Selections and four of the other businesses that sued alongside it asked the judge for an injunction, which would sort of compel the government to pay up. And you might think that paying up is like the natural next step here, but the Trump administration, officials like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, they've signaled that the trade court actually needs to order the refunds in order for that process to be kicked off. So it's kind of back to the courts they go.
Back to the courts they go. So we'll now see what the trade court does, whether it be in the auto parts case, also the action there in the wine importer cases. It comes back from the Supreme Court. And every time we talk about refunds, I always go back to Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who back in November really seemed to sum it up when she said this process is going to be, quote, a mess. No matter what you think about tariffs, maybe that is something we can all agree on, is this is going to be a mess.
Yeah, a mess from top to finish. But Zach, something else I sort of want to touch on before we pivot away from Supreme Court is where things stand on opinion watch. We know that the justices try to evenly divide the terms opinions among the 9 of them. And as we sort of get closer to 1 month of argued cases being decided, we can sort of start to read between the lines on which justices might be writing the remaining major cases. And I know that you track this really closely. So I kind of want you to read us the tea leaves here.
Yeah, I'll read you the tea leaves. Before I do, I want to say that this is what I'm about to say is not a prediction. I do not know who is writing the Supreme Court opinions in these forthcoming cases. I do not claim that I know, but there are some tea leaves, as you mentioned. So I'll give you the tea leaves, and that is we do now have a lot of the decisions from the month of October, the first argument session of the year. And because we have most of them in, you can start to see who hasn't written an opinion yet for October. And then you start to wonder, okay, so do they have the remaining decisions in October? So who is left? Well, after this morning's opinions, we got 2 more low-profile cases this morning. That means that we actually have 7 of the 9 justices who've written in October. So it leaves 2, and we only have 2 cases left. So the 2 justices left are Neil Gorsuch and Samuel Alito, two of the court's conservatives. And the two cases that we have left for October are two big ones. First one is the case over Colorado's conversion therapy ban, the challenge from a Christian counselor trying to strike it down on First Amendment grounds. And then you also have the big case over the Voting Rights Act. It stems out of Louisiana, but is going to pose wide implications for the future of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and majority-minority districts. So then the question becomes, so is Alito and does this mean that Alito and Gorsuch are the authors right now behind the scenes of those two opinions? And I don't know what you think, but to me, when I think about the conversion therapy case, at least on the Alito front, it doesn't seem like too much of a surprise. We know he's been interested in these issues in the past. So I don't know what you think, but if when all is said and done and we get that conversion therapy opinion and it is written by none other than Justice Samuel Alito, it really wouldn't come as a surprise to me.
No, I'm with you. I mean, even just looking at the fact that it's between Justice Alito and Justice Gorsuch, like Justice Gorsuch has ruled in the past in favor of LGBTQ community, and I think that Samuel Alito has not really camped himself up in that way, and so I would not be surprised at all if we see sort of an adverse ruling coming from the Justice Alito here.
Indeed. And we'll watch also that big Voting Rights Act case. I mean, we'll see if it's Gorsuch. Another one that comes to mind is Chief Justice John Roberts, these cases about, the use of race and what are the constitutional uses of race. This has been just a major legacy of his as you look back to the last 2 decades or so of the Roberts Court. And so even though the math right now in the tea leaves point to Alito and Gorsuch being outstanding, I do wonder if it's truly going to be even or if we'll get, a Roberts opinion here or something else. Well, we will see. It will be interesting, but we did have more opinions today. We don't know yet when the next Supreme Court opinion day is going to be. Unclear if there's going to be one next week during the arguments, but otherwise it might not be until the end of March until we get next opinions. We'll see. I do want to shift gears though, Ella, because you over the last week have been tracking, this is really shifting gears, a very different topic, but you have been tracking this very in depth. And this is a new push from the Justice Department on animal welfare. Fill us in.
Yeah, look, I mean, maybe you don't remember this, but we talked a couple months ago offhandedly that the Justice Department seemed to be charging and prosecuting an influx of animal cruelty cases. And lo and behold, last week, DOJ announced a major crackdown on animal welfare crimes. And that has coordination across agencies, including DOJ, Department of Agriculture, Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Health and Human Services. So that announcement sort of kicked off a 5-part plan to clamp down on animal cruelty, which it's going to include a week-long animal welfare summit to train federal prosecutors and agents across the country and prosecuting those types of crimes. And look, I will repeat my call out to DOJ. Please invite me to this. I would love to cover it. So if you are watching, hit me up. But anyways, this is really an administration-wide effort to crack down on animal cruelty. And so this is something I'm going to keep watching because I think that it's sort of a fascinating turn of events.
And is this all animals or is this just dogs? What's the scope that we're looking at here?
You know what, Zach? It really is mostly dogs. Both Attorney General Pam Bondi and Agriculture Secretary Brett Rollins, they center their statements here on dogs, their importance as family pets. Rollins in December actually hosted a first of its kind dog adoption event where we saw sort of pictures of Bondi and RFK Jr., Laura Trump. They were all photographed posing with puppies. And Bondi, in her statement announcing this new initiative, she said that nearly 300 dogs have been rescued from horrific circumstances since Trump returned to the White House. And I did my due diligence here. I reached out to DOJ. I asked the Justice Department for data on other animals. They did not respond. So this may only deepen the great divide between dog lovers, cat lovers, lovers of other animals.
All right. Well, if you do ever hear back, if the Justice Department does get back to you on other animals, do let us know because I, at least for one, I'm curious about that. But I'm sure this will poll well. Lots of other things the Justice Department's doing. We can argue about is this going to be popular with Americans, but this one. Maybe this will boost the poll numbers just a little bit.
I think so.
All right. One big other topic that's been really blowing up in the legal world over the last week that we just got to talk about before we go. And that is just the latest frontier of AI in influencing the legal world. It seems like every week we got a new AI story, but this week we really got a big development here.
I'm hoping
so I want to get into it.
Harvey AI collaboration with our Harvey Specter Suits character. That was, to me, the biggest development of this week.
Okay, so 2 developments this week. Number one, the Harvey AI. For any Suits fans out there, Harvey AI now partnering with Harvey. But as you and I have been talking about, though, There's no Donna version of this AI, which is a little disappointing for the Suits
Hopefully that's
fans
the
like us
next
out there.
next phase.
Viewers who have never watched the show are probably very confused right now, but go watch Suits
You get
and
it. You get it.
you get it. Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about this new ruling on AI from a judge in New York, specifically ruling that a criminal defendant who communicated with Claude, the AI chatbot that is developed by Anthropic, he communicated a series of communications after he received a subpoena from a grand jury. So this defendant knew he was under investigation, maybe on his way to an indictment, asked Claude a series of things, series of communications about the case. And then the government is now trying to use it against him as this man is now been charged and starts to go to trial. And he had made the argument that just like any conversation would be with his attorney, that this too is protected by attorney-client privilege. But here you have this judge saying no, it is not, saying that Claude is not an attorney. That in itself is reason that this can't be covered under attorney-client privilege. Also noting that these chats weren't confidential and that Claude is very particular in saying that anything you communicate with it can be shared with third parties. And then also, finally, the judge wrapped it up and gave a third reason, saying that this defendant wasn't actually communicating with Claude for the purpose of seeking legal advice. So a few reasons there from the judge of shooting this down. But the reason I want to talk about this is really it seems to be an issue of first impression nationwide of, does an AI chatbot, can those conversations be protected by attorney-client privilege? You've now got one judge saying no, but I'm curious your thoughts on this, Ella. What were your takeaways from this ruling?
I mean, my big takeaway here is read the terms of service before you start chatting with an AI bot. I mean, AI bots like Claude, after this ruling, they're not attorneys. Your conversations with them aren't confidential. So, I mean, that really means anything you say as it goes sort of maybe used against you in a court of law or otherwise. So, I mean, I think the other takeaway here, which maybe you can get into a little bit more as well, is like, lately it seems like everybody's been sort of worried about AI taking their jobs. And this ruling to me really signaled, okay, like not all AI is ready to take over the world. I mean, it's if you can't have your AI acting as an attorney, then I think attorneys might be okay for a little bit.
And one of the other things that, yeah, to just go a little deeper on this is that all of the, or many of the examples, maybe not all, but the vast majority of them where we see these hallucinations coming up, where these AI bots are citing, non-existent cases. When I've seen examples of lawyers being sanctioned and all of that, it's always been ChatGPT or Claude actually seems to usually be the most frequent one, at least in the cases I've looked at. But those just generic chatbots that are available to you or I as just an ordinary human being, it's not any sort of specialized legal tool. And in our written version of the Gavel newsletter this week, we talk about with companies who are actually developing specialty legal AI products. And the point I've been hearing from them in that interview earlier this week was the point that, okay, maybe ChatGPT and Claude is going to cause you issues, but that's what these specialty legal products are for, whether it be Harvey AI, as you mentioned, or all of the rest of tools that companies are developing, that maybe there is a future for AI, just not the generic ChatGPT that's searching through Google. But
yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's sort of casually used ChatGPT has probably come back with some heinously wrong answer. And so I think that you're right that as it gets more specialized, probably we'll see that being used more in some of these industries. But for now, what people are working with on the day-to-day consumer level, I don't think so.
Indeed, yeah. Take this as a word of warning from your Gavel team. Be careful if you're a defendant out there and you decide, oh, I should use ChatGPT. Let this be a word of warning. Ella and I have seen lawyers sanctioned for that, so be careful. Ella, all right, we are running out of time, but before we go, let's talk about, as we always do, what we are going to be watching for in the courts this upcoming week. I will start, and as I often do, I'm looking at the Supreme Court again this week. They are going to on Friday. They've got on their docket, among the dozens of petitions to take up cases at this week's conference, they are going to consider taking up Donald Trump's appeal of the jury's civil verdict that found him liable for sexually abusing writer E. Jean Carroll back in the mid-1990s. This big civil trial that came up while Trump was rerunning for the presidency has now finally gotten all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is now the moment where the Supreme Court is going to decide whether they are going to hear this claims or let that jury's verdict and that $5 million verdict stand. So big one to watch. Maybe we'll get that order in the 9:30 a.m. order list on Monday. But meanwhile, what are you going to be watching for this week?
Yeah, my eyes are on Georgia and Fulton County, where a couple weeks ago the FBI raided an elections hub tied to Trump's sort of efforts to prosecute unfounded 2020 election fraud. So on Friday, a judge is set to hold an evidentiary hearing sort of over that raid. And DOJ initially said that they would be fine with it, but now they're trying to get it canceled, saying they thought it was supposed to be oral arguments and not evidence. So this is still kind of up in the air, but if the evidentiary hearing does happen, I think it's going to be something we'll want to be watching closely.
Indeed. Well, that hearing's up in the air. We've got maybe a tariff refund hearing up in the air. Lots of hearings that are going to take place this week. We will bring it back next week with all the developments that happened between now and then. But that does it for us this week. Thanks so much for joining us on The Gavel. You can subscribe to get the Gavel newsletter in your inbox every Wednesday morning by going to thehill.com/newsletters. But that does it for us. Thanks for tuning in to The Gavel.